According to his statements, this federation involves cooperation among different intelligent civilizations and exchange of knowledge, the monitoring and developing of civilizations, and a cautious approach toward younger civilizations such as humanity. He suggested that humanity has not yet reached the level of maturity required for open interaction with these civilizations. He says that the idea of this federation has existed certainly in science fiction and UFO literature for decades, but it is a reality. And while there's no publicly available evidence to confirm its existence, it is something that he has basically rested his laurels on and his experience, stating that this is a true group that has interaction on Earth. It's made up of at least 9 different species, and they've been here for some time. He says that in general terms, the extraterrestrials have different makeups. So it's not just one type of species, but he includes the discussion of the gray aliens and says that they're probably going to be the first general species that humanity has some type of disclosure of, but he does not go into any further detail as to why there are only 9 civilizations, why aren't there 900, or why nine's the special number. But he does mention 9 in his books. No, he mentions that just due to the size of the universe, that these types of civilizations do exist, but according to him, the Galactic Federation is made up of 9 species. He does not give a source of this information, nor does he have any physical evidence of this. This is all just his verbal claims. Yeah, so he basically states that humanity has some type of program on Mars, specifically the American astronauts, that they have a joint base with some kind of extraterrestrials, um, and perhaps a crater on Mars, and that this is part of some type of secret space program. He moreover says that um, the architecture of Mars, or I should say, the archaeology of Mars, is really important to study. That when the public program of sending astronauts to Mars is um, in the public consciousness, that one of the things that astronauts will have to do, in addition to being geologists and certainly studying the climatologists, they will have to be archaeologists because perhaps there are some types of structures, perhaps some type of ancient civilization that was once there. He talks about some type of um, underground base there. He does say that the American astronauts have made some kind of contact with Mars, which is really a very difficult uh, idea to swallow, just considering all of the challenges that are there. And then he also makes some claims on some of the photographs that were taken from the different rovers and states that many of the pictures do not necessarily look natural, that perhaps there are some artificial structures there that may need to be studied. And we would like to preface all of this by saying these are what he has said, not necessarily what is actually there or what perhaps I believe, but this is something that he has said, that humans have already been to Mars. He doesn't say when we got there, he doesn't say what programs are going on there. He just states that there is an American astronaut program underground, um, working alongside the Galactic Federation. He doesn't specify. Yes. So, to give people a timeline, we have President Trump's first term, which was essentially from 2016 to 2020, and Haim Eshed's whistleblowing occurred at the end of 2020. I guess to be more specific, President Trump until January of 2021. So during the first term, Haim stated that President Trump was aware of information related to extraterrestrial matters. Uh, According to his interview, he stated that Trump had considered revealing information but was discouraged because humanity was not ready. This became one of the most controversial parts of the interview. While there's no verified evidence confirming that Trump had direct knowledge of extraterrestrial contact or that he had planned a disclosure announcement or even that the US government possesses confirmed proof of extraterrestrial civilizations. This was a claim that Haim Eshed had made in 2020, and we'll get into in a little bit that there was a recent interview that Haim Eshed did with Uri Geller in 2026, actually last month, and within that discussion, they state that they still believe that the Galactic Federation exists, and they don't retract any of their previous statements. So, from Haim Eshed's standpoint, he believes that Donald Trump does have direct knowledge of extraterrestrial contact, that there was a planned disclosure announcement, and the U.S. government possesses confirmed proof of extraterrestrial civilizations, but yet, for whatever reason, President Trump was discouraged to reveal this information because humanity was not ready. And this is a claim that Haim Eshed states that the Galactic Federation makes, that humanity is not ready. There are some major topics and um, reasons that he gives. A central theme in his interview is the idea that humanity may not be psychologically or socially prepared for full disclosure of extraterrestrial contact. He suggests that learning that we are not alone could create major changes in human society. Potential impacts that he mentions are religious questions about humanity's place in creation, political challenges, economic uncertainty, changes in philosophy and culture, and really just questions about human uniqueness. This concept is sometimes called ontological shock, the idea that discovering something completely unexpected from reality could transform how people understand themselves and existence. He suggests that extraterrestrial civilizations may prefer gradual disclosure rather than sudden revelation, which makes sense in our current time with perhaps soft disclosure that has been happening slowly over the course of the last 80 or so years, as opposed to one event that triggers complete disclosure. It depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the person. It depends on the community. But for many forward-thinking religious leaders, many rabbis in particular, even the rabbis of a generation ago, including uh, who's known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe of the Chabad Hasidic dynasty, Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory, the idea that humanity is not alone in the universe is not something that necessarily causes religion to stop. At least within Judaism, we are an adaptable religion. We do not have one single figurehead that determines doctrine. Generally, we look toward the rabbinate, my rabbinical colleagues, and leaders within the religion to be able to adapt the religion in whatever way is necessary. And um, really, as a religious leader, if we were made aware that aliens were here on Earth at some point, either currently or in the past, or we were seated here, it may take some slight adjustments to some ideas, or perhaps interpreting some religious ideas as perhaps metaphors as opposed to um, something that we may take more literally. But in reality, this is something that we have to recognize with the size of the universe that there is a very small chance that we are here alone. I can tell you that I've taken this subject to my rabbinical colleagues, including within the modern Orthodox community and Hasidic communities, including Chabad. I've shown them UFOs flying parallel to Soviet MiGs, and asked my rabbinical colleagues to be able to explain it. And I get two separate answers. Basically, the first is that there's only God and there's some rejection of this. And then the other, which is much more progressive, which is perhaps we're not alone and we're going to have to brace for this and brace our communities for that. And I personally feel that that's the mature approach to take. We shouldn't stick our heads in the sand. We should recognize that we may not be alone and we should handle this subject in a mature fashion. Well, it may, depending on the role that extraterrestrials may have had on Earth. So there's the idea that humanity was perhaps seeded here, an idea known as panspermia, but perhaps guided panspermia by another species. And if that occurs, it will cause some issues to the creation story because, of course, there's nothing about that within Bereshit or Genesis and really any creation story. But many people already interpret aspects of the creation story to be metaphorical, that the earth or really our world was created in 7 days, and perhaps those were seven, each day was a billion years. Some people look at that metaphor or analogy for the way that the world could have been created. And the idea would be that from a traditional standpoint, early our early ancestors didn't have a way to be able to properly be able to explain their origins. And so they used the best type of creation story that perhaps they could have had and relied on the sages to be able to explain where we came because they just weren't able to properly communicate the idea of guided panspermia or something of that nature. So from a creation standpoint, this certainly would have some major impact. But this doesn't necessarily mean that if disclosure happened today, that we still wouldn't, at least as Jews, keep kosher. We still wouldn't value traditional family ethics and morality and values. Much of our daily lives would not be changed. There are many of us who already know that we are not alone and yet still are able to balance a religious life with the idea of uh, humanity's role in the universe. And we're able to do so with an open mind and with confidence that when our colleagues and other members of our community recognize that we aren't alone, that it shouldn't cause fear. We should recognize that it's an opportunity for the religion to perhaps mature, adapt, and continue continue embracing our traditional values while also embracing the new aspects that are to be discovered along with the rest of the world in both other religions and the secular world. It's Chaim. Yes, he does. So he discusses the philosophical effects. Um, Essentially, his ideas include consciousness as part of a universal network, that human awareness is connected to a larger cosmic structure, that the idea of death is potentially a transformation rather than a complete ending. He really described the possibility that humans become connected again for a larger cosmic fabric after physical death. And these ideas generally overlap in discussions found in the philosophy of consciousness, spiritual traditions, the study of near-death experiences, certainly speculative interpretations of quantum theory, and really modern neuroscience has not confirmed that consciousness survives biological death, but the nature of consciousness remains one of science's greatest unanswered questions. And at least from Time to Shed's standpoint, the idea of consciousness does not end with that. Sure. A little bit. I know that they, within the last decade, were able to have some type of lunar touchdown. I believe it happened in 2019 or so. That was the first time that they were able to have any type of successful uh, purported connection with lunar lunar surface. That their satellite program really was it, I would say, uh, increased and expanded under Time to Shed's tutelage, which allowed them to move from satellites and then into rocketry. And as well, they do have Israeli astronauts that do work with other countries in order to in low Earth orbit generally at this time. And I believe they were the fifth country perhaps in space, depending on how that idea is perhaps uh, what you consider to be in space, generally low Earth orbit, and then perhaps being able to send uh, missions outside of low Earth orbit past the Van Allen radiation belts. Aside from that, it's quite a um, clandestine and I would say very much classified program to some extent. Um, are you referencing like an extraterrestrial craft? So there, that hasn't necessarily been confirmed, obviously, because that would be disclosure. Um, I can tell you, at least from Time Mached's interview, he does say that at least on Mars, there and just in general, the Galactic Federation has some type of craft, like a mothership that's the size of a small town, and then it has craft that expand from that, that are like run by robots. But as for Israel itself, it's a small country. It's about the size of New Jersey, and for anyone who may think that they could have a craft, that is certainly conjecture, but that hasn't been confirmed. Generally, responses have been divided. Supporters point to his aerospace background, his experience with government space programs, his knowledge of advanced technology. They argue that his position makes his statements worthy of serious consideration. However, his skeptics argue that his claims require evidence, that his credentials alone do not prove extraordinary statements, and that there's no physical evidence that has been publicly presented. And that's always the issue that we get with the whistleblowers. What evidence do we have? The scientific approach certainly requires independent verification, documentation, and repeatable evidence. And really, while many scientists believe, well, like elsewhere in the universe is likely, confirmed evidence of extraterrestrial visitation has not been publicly established. That's really the big issue with Time Machete, is he makes some major statements and major claims, but really we have no evidence It's an excellent question. So there have been some independent investigators who attempted to get follow-up interviews with him. So to give a little bit of a timeline, he publishes the book in November of 2020. He does an interview with an Israeli newspaper December 2nd, 2020, and then basically disappears off the radar, even though his claims made international news and garnered international attention. Many people wanted to know what happened to him. Uh, People contacted his publisher. His publisher made the researchers aware that he was not available for any interviews. They made the people who were researchers aware that the co author of the book was not available for any interviews. And also that the book, there were no plans to publish it in English, which was quite intriguing. That if you were doing your best to sell as many books as possible, perhaps you would want to put this information in a language that is perhaps more predominant in the world than Hebrew, but this was not done until 2026, and just so happens last month, uh, in June of 2026, Chaim uh, had uh, a, a joint interview with Uri Geller. For those who don't know, they're both Israeli. Uri Geller goes back decades in many supernatural phenomena discussions that aren't necessarily relevant for this discussion, but he is someone, Uri Geller is someone who has a certain social media and publicity history that would allow Chaim to be able to get out messages about what had happened to him over the course of the last 6 years and why he had disappeared for so long. So, um, the exact event that occurred was a June 10th, 2026 interview where Uri Geller interviews Chaim Ashed, and they address the public inquiry. Geller opens by acknowledging that they have had thousands of inquiries regarding Ashed's multi-year silence following his controversial 2020 revelations, and this is very interesting. Chaim Ashed says that he had a Men in Black encounter. He attributes his withdrawal to a visit from mysterious, untraceable figures at his apartment. These individuals demonstrated intimate personal knowledge of his life and questioned him on sensitive topics, including nuclear physics. He chose to cease public discourse on the subject following this encounter until he could consult with Geller. And this is really probably one of the more recent publicly acknowledged Men in Black encounters that he had. His interview is in English, so for any of the audience who's interested in hearing, if they're English speaking, and hearing exactly what Chaim had to say, you can certainly hear for yourself. But basically, he did say that there were these mysterious, untraceable Men in Black figures who caused him to remain silent for the last 6 years, and it was only until Uri he had the opportunity, Chaim had the opportunity to meet with Uri Geller, and perhaps enough time had passed for him, for Chaim Ashed to explain why his absence occurred. And also, Chaim is now 93 years old, and so if he didn't have anything to lose, so to speak, at 87, he's got even less to lose at 93. And so, for anyone out there who wants to um, perhaps hear exactly what Chaim had to say, I would definitely encourage you to see that interview that he has with Uri Geller. But that is a summary of what occurred. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know perhaps if anyone aside from Kine himself knows the answer. Um, it is really something that's absolutely fascinating that at 93 years old, he's still of sound mind and he did not retract anything that he previously had said. Um, but perhaps he did get the green light now to be able to make these statements, and I personally am happy that he did because it leads more credibility that he's not retracting what he previously stated. He still believes in the Galactic Federation, and just generally, he he's in good health, and you can see he's of sound mind, and he doesn't seem to be threatened to be making these new statements. That he seems to be doing so of his own accord, and that is certainly that is certainly I would say a relief to see as well as someone who cares about the person. Well, first and foremost, his role is arguably one of the most or the highest ranking officials to ever speak about extraterrestrials and to have it done in the more modern era, and especially in a post pandemic world, is quite interesting. He was a brigadier general. He graduated from Technion in Israel. He has over 30 years of experience within the Israeli Defense Force. He's the father of the Israeli satellite program, at least. Plus, he is one of the most decorated individuals in all of Israel. He has won many different prizes, some that can be um, that are made public, but even other prizes he has won. But Israel will not say exactly on what projects he won for which for what projects he won these different awards. So he still has parts of his uh, career that are still, at least to some extent, classified. Yet he came out and was willing to speak about this and just the topics on which he speaks about a galactic federation, perhaps expanding the idea of the of what a close encounter um, is really, I think, quite an interesting take that he has, and the idea that perhaps uh, we certainly aren't alone. Perhaps that consciousness continues. We hear this within ufology in a lot of different, uh, from a lot of different whistleblowers and also people, so to speak, in the know. But we never really hear of this all coming from one person who's as vetted as someone like Chaim Mashed is. And um, moreover, Israeli the Israeli military is quite clandestine and has many classified aspects to it. And to get a whistleblower directly from Israel, I think, is very unique. And for many people who are interested in the in ufology in general and the alien phenomenon, to hear someone who has basically accomplished everything within the Israeli military that you can. And on top of that, is a contractor and a professor to be able to speak with these subjects of with such certainty, even though he lacks evidence, I would say caused the international attention that we saw. I do, absolutely, yeah. For anyone who has any doubts, I recommend the Disclosure Project as the way to dip your toe into the subject. And then recognize that we, as people who believe in the phenomena, are the majority. And that's what the Pew Research polls, that's what CBS polls, uh, that a majority of Americans at least believe that we are not alone, and many of us, perhaps a significant portion of those who have been polled, who are believers, believe that we are visited here, and perhaps we've been seated here as some kind of guided panspermia, and that the technology that even you and I are using right now is perhaps reverse engineered. I think that there is some similarities between what Chaim Eshed states with some of the claims that he makes, and Philip J. Corso and the claims that he makes regarding reverse engineering of alien technology. He couldn't prove anything. He didn't necessarily have any evidence, but he was a relatively high ranking military official who stated that types of technology like the transistor, microelectronics, things like stealth, perhaps night vision, even things like Velcro and Scotchgard, um, are all perhaps reverse engineered from alien crafts. And Chaim Eshed makes many, I would say, whistleblowing statements in a similar way, but both of them lack evidence. And that's a very difficult aspect of this. But for what they lack in evidence, we have other whistleblowers who are willing to talk about some of the things that they've experienced, perhaps like Bob Lazar and Element 115, Un Pentium, Moscovium, whatever you want to call it, that he at least blew the whistle on in the late 1980s, but wouldn't be discovered again really for another decade or so. We have on the front page of the New York Times in 2017 uh, the idea of getting UFOs on FLIR cameras and perhaps the Tic Tac event that occurs and whistleblowers within the government that have occurred in the years since then. There's more and more evidence that's growing and growing, in my opinion, as to what is being disclosed. And really, I feel it's a matter of just a matter of time. If you were to poll the American public at Roswell in 1947, and we just celebrated the 79th anniversary recently of the Roswell crash, I would say that it was probably a very small minority of people actually thought that aliens were here on Earth. And we've just been able to see over the course of the last 79 years or so that small minority has now become the majority of Americans. And it's not going to take, in my opinion, another 79 years for the majority to become a supermajority. And really, then disclosure essentially occurs. So, in my opinion, I'm a believer. I want to say again, I was once a major skeptic on this subject. I used to debate people on this subject because I figured it couldn't be kept a secret. But the Manhattan Project was kept a secret with over 150,000 contractors. The idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe was kept a secret from many people until Galileo and Copernicus. And perhaps the idea that we are not alone as a civilization has been kept a secret, at least in the modern age. But I am positive that this idea is not going to be in the darkness for too much longer. We have movies like Disclosure Day that occurred. We have movies that are really becoming mainstream on your different streaming platforms where they take this subject seriously. And I think that we should as well. We should act with maturity and we should act with reverence, recognizing that we aren't alone and how can we best adapt as a civilization and move forward. Well, I'd like there to be more, certainly. I, I see that we get pictures and FLIR cameras. Um, Frankly, the things that aren't released from the government, I find to be perhaps in many ways more um, credible in some ways because uh, they there's better evidence many times. So, what am I referencing? Going back into early days of photography, the crafts, the airships that were photographed, moving into after, well, just World War II, the Foo Fighter sightings, which weren't really uh, recognized or at least perhaps um, uh, verified by the government, at least from a leadership standpoint. We have the UFO flap over Washington in the 1950s. We move into the alien abductee phenomenon and perhaps different types of implants into people. And so those types of events, then moving into the modern age, the more recent uh, disclosure, disclosures of the government, even just like ATIP and different organizations that people don't even really necessarily know exist, or crash retrieval programs that actually exist, whistleblowers. These are all very positive events uh, within the last year or so. The different congressional hearings that we've seen, where we have some very brave congresspeople who are trying to get to the bottom of these subjects. To me, these are very positive. We didn't see this a decade ago or earlier than that. But to see congresspeople taking this subject very seriously, I find to be of extreme importance, and I would like it to come from even higher up. I'd like to see the president make this a mainstream issue, no matter who the president is, no matter their background. This is the most important event in the history of the country and, frankly, the history of the world. So I'd like to see more of it, but I'm very positive of the more recent disclosures that have been made, and I'd like for them to continue and eventually to convince everyone that we are not alone. So Tanakh is what generally Christians would call the Old Testament, which is Torah, and then the prophets, and then the writings, usually what we call Ketuvim, the Psalms and the shorter scrolls. So these combined would be mhm, yeah, TN, sure. Some people interpret Ezekiel's wheel as perhaps a craft of some sort. So essentially, it is uh, within the first chapter of Ezekiel, where he describes a vision that he had of a wheel in the sky, which sounds a lot like a craft of some sort, perhaps, but it could have been just a vision that he had. It's not the Bible is not very specific on any kind of similarities necessarily between the craft or the wheel and a UFO craft, but he does reference perhaps different faces of different beasts that he witnesses and different eyes, perhaps, and this magnificent sight in the sky, which some people interpret to be a UFO. There are other people who talk about angels. The term angel essentially means messenger, and the idea that perhaps angels of some sort could be some type of other type of messenger of Hashem, of God. Some people do reference those as being perhaps some type of different species. Generally, it's not specific, the Bible is not specific on the matter. There are other discussions that people have regarding the feeling, perhaps giants of the Bible, and maybe they were some type of other species that may exist. But generally, the Bible doesn't reference any event of an abduction or some type of direct UFO sighting. And for those reasons, I think that perhaps the the events that are depicted aren't necessarily of a ufology origin, but that doesn't mean that they're not. I'm just saying that there's not enough evidence one way or another. That's absolutely correct. I've been live streaming my life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for world peace going back to the pandemic. We've seen the death of a queen, the birth of AI, the coronation of a king, and everything in between. This is essentially a real life Truman Show or a real life Big Brother. It's a timeline and a time capsule of human existence. And I think that this is amazing opportunity for people to not just study my life because I'm always streaming, but I also keep recordings of news events that are going. So you can literally go back to any moment of any day of my life for the last 4 years, almost five, and know not only what was going on within my life, but what was going on in human events. If I were doing this generations ago, people might interpret what I'm doing as being a diarist or someone writing a diary, or a journalist, someone writing in a journal. But what I'm doing is using video as my medium to be able to capture this. And I think it may perhaps in the future may have an immense amount of value for people. The Economist magazine stated in 2017 that data had overtaken petroleum as Earth's number one resource. And I've archived more data than any person in the history of the world. And I believe that this data will be studied in the future, very much like a time capsule, but also as a basis for AI models on humans, and even the opportunity for people to be able to study different human systems, aging, biology, circadian rhythms, sleep cycles, eating habits, behavior. Every aspect of the human could be studied by this. So, yes, I have been doing this, and I think it's a really exciting project. Absolutely. Moreover, they live with me in my Discord. Right now, I have people who have spent more than a year with me alongside 24 hours a day, living their lives alongside me. I get people who literally spend all day, every day for the last year doing that, or people who just want to connect with me at night before they go to bed. They want to not sleep alone. I get other people throughout really every country in the world at some point of the day will come in to say hi, to update me on their day, to perhaps get pastoral support. Certainly, they may have some type of questions. They may look for advice. I'm really to help. I'm a resource to help people in any way possible. So, in addition to living their lives with me on Discord, within my Discord, yes, there are people who don't want to connect with me. They just like the idea that they aren't alone, and they'll watch my YouTube streams 24 hours a day as well whenever they have free time. Absolutely. Yes, as best I can. So at any given time, I'm live on over 25 different angles on YouTube. So it's difficult to get to every single comment. But what I do say in all of my descriptions generally is come to my Discord. I have areas where I will answer any question that you have. It's an AMA. People can type whatever question they have in there, and that message gets to me directly, and I answer it immediately in a very timely manner. And so I do have the ability for people to leave comments for me, which I invite anyone to do. But if somebody wants an immediate answer from me, you can just come into my Discord and ask me person to person. But if you're not comfortable doing that, feel free to just type in my AMA. It's a section at the top of my Discord. And you can ask me any question that you want. The best way to find it is to type Rabbi Rothschild into YouTube and filter by live. One of my main accounts is Best Creator Ever. I have another Rabbi Michael Rothschild. I have many different accounts. I don't have one particular one that I would say is my main account because I'm live on so many different ones. If you want a list of them all, you can go to my Linktree, linktree.com/, Rabbi Rothschild, and they're all listed there. Absolutely. If I were to summarize the entire Talmud standing on one foot, it is to treat others the way that you want to be treated. If we can do that, whether you're of a religious background, a secular background, or something in between, we can all come together on that. Please, if you are out there and you are hearing me, recognize that I care about you. There are people in this world who care about you. If you're going through a very difficult time, know that it gets better. Time heals all wounds. And if I can ever be of any assistance to anyone out there, please connect with me. I will do everything that I can to help you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Jeff, and thank you to your audience. do too. Excellent. Jeff, thank you so much for, no one can hear you, but I do have cameras that can view you. Yeah, excellent. I'm glad you challenged me. And I agreed with everything that you said. Roswell had been done. If you're not an alien abductee, perhaps I'm not the best person to do it, but I could lend a little bit of information regarding this topic. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate your patience with me and to have this conversation. And in the future, if you ever need me, I'm here for you. If you ever need to connect with me, I'll do everything I can to help you, okay? I'll send you a headshot right now. Okay. Absolutely. If I may contribute, Galactic Federation would be great. I think I I think that gets a lot of attention. Excellent. Okay, I will send you that right now. Thank you so much. Take care. You as well. You as well. Bye. You too. Sometimes